Hello and welcome to Issues and Answers, a production of the Government Information Service. I'm your host for today, Geraldine Bisset Joseph. The National Utilities Regulatory Commission, NURC, was established by Parliament Act No. 3 of 2016 to regulate the operations of the water and electricity sectors in St. Lucia through a multi-sector independent regulatory body. Now, to tell us a little bit more about it, I'm joined here today by Mr. Jerome Jules, who is the CEO of the National Utilities Regulatory Commission.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Jules.
Thank you for having me, Chanel.
Okay, brilliant. Now, first of all, tell us a little bit about NURC. What exactly is the Commission?
Okay. The Commission is a regulatory body, in essence. It's an autonomous body that is established to regulate and license electricity supply services and water supply services. Now, there are two issues there. First of all, a few years ago, in 1999, the government established what was the National Water and Sewerage Commission, which regulated water services and water service delivery. 3 years ago, the government decided that it wanted, in collaboration with the other OECS countries, to liberalize the electricity sector, which means that it was looking to remove the monopoly that LUSELEC had on the generation of electricity and was prepared to liberalize one element of the electricity sector, which would be generation. And initially the idea was to have a regional regulator for electricity. But that failed. And so the government decided that it would still go ahead and establish its own regulatory mechanism. But rather than establish a separate electricity regulator, it decided to establish a multi-sectoral regulator, which comprised a regulator for water and a regulator for electricity. And therefore, the National Water and Sewerage Commission was made defunct, and the NURC, as we call it, is now responsible for regulating both sectors.
Okay, all right, I understand. But what was the real necessity behind the establishment of the NURC?
All right. I think first of all, let's establish the basis for regulation. In certain industries, self-regulation does not work, primarily because the firms and the businesses may have their own agenda and they have their own objectives. Consequently, you need to establish this autonomous independent body which would control what happens in the sectors, whether it be electricity or in water. And therefore, you decide that a decision is made to establish this regulator. And you have a regulator for essentially 3 reasons in almost any sector. But although we're dealing with the utility regulation, in almost any sector, a regulator has 3 primary functions. One is to protect consumers from firms and organizations and businesses which have significant monopoly power and would tend to use that power to exploit consumers. The second reason is to promote investment by giving investors a sense that there would not be too much government intervention in its business and that the playing field would be level. And there's almost a guarantee that we'll be playing by a set of standard rules. And the third reason is that you want to encourage efficiency. With a regulator, from time to time, you would be examining the business of whether the utility company, and by preventing them from charging exorbitant costs and by refusing to allow them to recover costs which are not necessary, you are in fact forcing them to be more efficient. And these are the primary reasons why you would have a regulator in almost any industry.
Okay, all right, brilliant. Now, can you tell me a little bit about the governance arrangements of the NURC? How exactly is the institution actually set up?
All right. The NURC, the primary decision-making body of the institution that we call the NURC, is the Board of Commissioners. And they're the ones, the NURC has 7 commissioners, and they're the ones who will make and sit and deliberate and make almost every decision of the NURC. So when one hears about a NURC making a decision on any matter, it is the commissioners who have made that decision. The commissioners are, in fact, going to be assisted by advisory committees. And the rationale for that is that you cannot have almost every level of expertise among your commissioners. And therefore, a lot of these expertise lie out in the public domain. And the commission, therefore, would like to have recourse to seek expert advice from outside. And so we have established 2 such committees. One is the Energy Advisory Committee, which would advise the commission on matters relating to renewable energy and electricity. And there's a Water Advisory Committee, which is going to advise the commission on water and sewage matters. Again, it's because we recognize that if you had to have all of this expertise within the commission itself, then you would have a structure that is so large and costly to operate. So you prefer to have, what you have is a very lean commission with the mandate to be able to go out there and to get advice from experts out there. And the third arm is the secretariat, which I head as CEO, which is really the staff who would conduct all of the research and basically present information that would facilitate decision-making by the commissioners. As of now, the commission has a 8-member secretariat, which comprises a CEO, a regulatory economist, an energy specialist, a water specialist, and you have your other administrative staff who provide administrative support such as accounting and other services. By comparison, you have other regional commissions which were staff of 30. But a deliberate decision was made not to establish a commission which is very, very large, but to start off with what you can call the minimal or the optimal size, and to grow the organization as the demands on the organization increases.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be back right after this.
Look at this email.
Looks like phishing.
On the internet?
Phishing is an illegal attempt to obtain financial or other confidential information from internet users through an email or website that appears to come from a legitimate organization. Here's how not to get caught. Don't open email attachments you did not expect to receive. If unsure about an email or website, call the company to verify. Change your passwords often. Don't use the same passwords on multiple sites. Use a secure website with HTTPS instead of HTTP. Monitor online banking accounts regularly and check your statements.
This message is brought to you as a public service announcement by Ectel, the NTRC, and this station.
Welcome back to Issues and Answers. I am your host, Geraldine Bisset-Joseph. Today we are joined by Mr. Jerome Jules, who is the CEO of the National Utilities Regulatory Commission. Now, Mr. Jules, before we went to break, we were talking about the makeup of the institution, the different roles that people have and such likes. But I do understand you've been established for a year now. So what have you been doing in that time? What has NURC been up to?
Okay. The functions of any regulatory body is fairly complex. And I can tell you that there are regulators in the Caribbean who are still growing and still developing and still deciding what is the best form that the organization should take. And so over the last year, we've been doing essentially preparing the organization so that it can effectively perform the functions that it is assigned. First of all, you need to establish legislation and regulation in order to be able to, because everything we do are going to be guided by legislation. We cannot act outside the ambits of the law. And there have been 34 pieces of legislation and regulations drafted that would guide the work of the NURC. And we have been, over the last year, reviewing this draft legislation and looking for gaps in this legislation and making arrangements for recommendations for the amendment. We have also been developing procedures, because the Act says that the Commission ought to develop its own procedures. And those procedures would have to do with things like how you consult, how you review tariffs, how you investigate complaints, even how the Commission governs itself. Now, people may say this takes an awfully long time, but legislation and procedures ought to be done right, so that the decisions that the Commission make will not be subject to review, and even when it is subject to review, that decisions would be so well based on the law and in fact that those decisions can stand. We have also been developing procedures for applications for connecting photovoltaic systems to the electricity grid. That's the new thing now. One of the things that the government has been pushing is for adoption of renewable sources of generation.
That's correct.
And there has been a demand over the last 2 or 3 years for persons to purchase and install photovoltaic systems, or what is called solar energy generating systems on their houses or on their businesses. But one could very well understand why this should not be done in a haphazard manner. The connection of any new system to the existing electricity grid poses certain risk. And so we have been working along with LoSelect to establish those procedures that would allow these things to be connected safely to electricity grid. So we have developed a set of procedures that have been gazetted that would guide applicants as to how you proceed in order for you to order, install, and get your system connected to the grid. And that has taken a fairly long time. And the reason is you want to be absolutely sure that these things are done in a safe manner, so that neither the national grid nor the homes, the property, and life is threatened. And so these are some of the issues we've been working on in the last year. It has taken an inordinate amount of time as far as you're concerned, but we believe in doing things right the first time around. And that's where, and there are people who will say, this has taken an awfully long time and we may be criticized for it. But we believe that rather we prefer to approach this thing very cautiously rather than to do it hastily and have to return to correct any errors that we may have made.
Okay. Now, leading on to that, because I mean, people out there will be very happy to hear that the way that you've gone about it. But something else I know that they might be interested in hearing is how this service, how does the service actually provide, what service does NURC actually provide to consumers directly?
Okay. We indicated earlier that we are there to protect the consumer from unscrupulous utility providers, if there were to be any. So the NURC, first of all, by reviewing applications for tariffs and rates, gives the public the assurance that we have reviewed those rates that have been applied for, whether it be by the by the water company or the electricity company, and that these rates are fair and reasonable. So consumers out there can rest assured that a third party has actually looked at those rates that have been applied for and have given it the treatment, and can assure them that they are reasonable, that we have not allowed any costs that are not necessary to be claimed by the company. That's the first thing, first assurance consumers should have. The second thing is that we have established standards and quality standards for both electricity and for water, so that the consumer should rest assured, or can rest assured, that the product that comes through his pipe, that there is some attempt at ensuring that it meets some local, international established standards. We know that consumers of water from time to time have expressed their concern about the quality of water. And so these quality guidelines exist, but we know from time to time that the utility company may tend to stray away from these quality guidelines. But it is our responsibility to establish those standards and to monitor to ensure that these standards have been met. Okay. The other issue is about complaints. We are aware that almost every consumer has some complaints, whether it be with his electricity company, with his water company, his telecommunications company. And he needs to be assured, the consumer needs to be assured that if he does not get the kind of redress that he's seeking at the end of the utility company, that he has somewhere that he can go and that his complaint or his grievance can be given the treatment that it deserves, which means that it will be investigated and the NURC will make a decision as to whether or not he has been properly treated by the utility company and whether or not he needs to be compensated or how can his issue be resolved. So that's the third thing that consumers, that's a service we consume, as well as the issue of allowing the consumer to appeal against any decision that the NURC has made. And so essentially, these are the services that we give directly to the consuming public. And at any time any consumer has an issue that he felt that has not been resolved properly at the end of the utility company, he or she can come into our offices and to make a complaint, and we'll determine whether it's something that we need to follow up on their behalf.
Okay. Now, Mr. Jules, it's been great talking to you. However, I've been told we've actually run out of time. So that, to me, that's a great place to end. Okay. So thank you for joining us today. And thank everybody out there for tuning in also. However, do make sure that you stay tuned to the National Television Network. Bye-bye for now.